When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. According to a recent Pew Center poll, Americans are largely skeptical of the news media. According to another recent poll, Americans are skeptical that healthcare costs will decrease anytime soon. But what is this skepticism that many Americans are expressing, and what is it based on? As the philosopher Tanya Lombroso has written, skepticism is supposed to reflect a willingness to question and doubt, a key characteristic of scientific thinking. Skepticism encourages us to look at the evidence critically. It allows for the possibility that we're wrong. End quote. That is, maintaining a healthy skepticism, what I would call a relentless interest in verification, is essential as we try to look for the qualities that separate rational arguments and conclusions from those that aren't rational. Skepticism is an exhaustive search for better explanations, for better evidence. At its best, skepticism indicates a willingness to question even answers that seem obvious. A faith, and I use this word deliberately, a faith that additional information can strengthen our conclusions, and a desire to revisit the conclusions we have already drawn. A skepticism that lacks a reason to be skeptical, one that lacks humility, a knee-jerk, doubtful response to claims or sources you don't like, a never-ending movement of the goalpost of proof, a suspicious default into unpersuadability. These replicate the very problem of certainty and arrogance that rational skepticism was created to solve. That is, healthy skepticism surrenders to the possibility of plausible belief. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Today's guest on When We Disagree is Zara Smith. Zara is a student from Fairfield, Connecticut, who also runs the nonprofit Flowering Progress, which is dedicated to using art to end stigmas around mental health. Zara, tell us an argument story.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My first story, or my only story that I'm going to tell today, is about a time where I was dating this boy, which is a very normal teenage girl thing to do. And I started talking to him about things that I was passionate about, one of those things being abortion rights. And he told me that he had no stance. And that's where I disagreed with him. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how we can disagree when someone doesn't have an opinion, because having no opinion to me means that you have an opinion.
Say more about that. So let's set up the context. You are in a relationship and it gets to politics inevitably. It gets to a thorny issue like abortion inevitably.
Yeah.
You say your opinion. He says, I don't have an opinion. Just, that's it.
Straight up.
Just
I don't have an opinion on that.
I got nothing on that.
I got nothing on that. That's basically what he said. And this was at the time when Roe v. Wade was just overturned. So I was very passionate about my rights and what that meant for my abilities. I mean, I was young at this point, still am, but
just to be clear, what is your position?
I am very pro-choice.
Okay.
I think that it's a woman's right to decide what she wants to do with her body. And I also think it's very important to emphasize that being pro-choice doesn't mean being pro-abortion.
Right.
So.
And in his response in this moment, you didn't feel like he was just kind of ducking the issue. He genuinely was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think he genuinely didn't have an answer. He had never thought about it. It never had crossed his mind, the fact that someone he loved or someone that he cared about would have to face this. And I think that that's kind of what unsettled me a little bit. And that's when I got a little bit upset because I felt as though an issue that affects so many women and an issue that affects a woman's right to her own body should be thought about and talked about.
Was this a species of arguments that you had with him where you would have an opinion and he wouldn't, and that was frustrating, or is this a kind of one-time only deal?
It was kind of a one-time only deal. I just remember being in Martha's Vineyard, actually, and Roe v. Wade was overturned, and it was like kind of the day that it was really presented. And I just remember being so upset and worried and scared for me and also for my fellow females and people who need an abortion. And I remember bringing my concern to him and him just having no sense of what that meant to me and what that meant to women across the country. And it just made me feel as though I was unseen in a way.
You felt unseen in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
You felt part of an enormous group of people, half the population, who you felt like he was not seeing.
Yeah,
and what did he say?
He just basically was like, I don't understand why I need to have an opinion on this. I'm not a woman.
Okay.
And I think the reason why that upsets me so much is because of the double standard that would have happened. I think that if men were to have if it was mandatory for men to have vasectomies before, like, they wanted to have children, then it would be a much different issue and women would be educated on that issue and care about that issue. So I think it's hard to see that he wasn't worried about it for me.
Well, and that's a different argument too, right? If he says, I just don't have an opinion about this issue because I'm 17, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. And if he says, I just don't have an opinion about this issue because I feel morally conflicted about both sides and I think both sides have decent arguments and I'm just kind of confused and shrug emoji, throw my hands up.
Yeah, I think
that's another thing.
Yeah, I think it started as him not having an opinion and then me talking about my stance and giving him facts and sending him articles. And it was a long disagreement.
This is a process.
Yeah. And it got to the point where he was like, I see both sides. I don't really understand why I need to have an opinion on this.
How long is this process?
2 weeks.
Okay.
And then I was like, he came to the conclusion that he was pro-life.
Oh.
And that if something were to have happened, then he wouldn't support me having an abortion.
So he comes into this saying, this is irrelevant to my life. I don't have an opinion. You go through a 2-week persuasion process and he ends up with exactly the opposite of your position.
Yep, exactly.
What do you think happened there?
I think he just thought more about how it would affect him. I really don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's hard to understand where someone's coming from, and I try to see it from his perspective as well. But it's honestly hard for me to understand when people don't support women in making the choice about their own body.
Right.
And I think especially in today's political scheme, that's been something that's been weighing heavy on me.
What do you make of pro-life women?
I've never really thought about that. And I think I have thought about it, but in passing because it's such a hard topic to think about.
Yeah.
I think women who are pro-life women should think further and maybe have thought further about other women's decisions. And if they weren't in the same position that they are in, I don't know if it's religious affiliation that creates their stance or if it's just like a moral feeling. But I think it just comes down to the thought of, do you want your own autonomy over your own body? And for women who are in situations, especially low-income women who don't have access to contraception or who are struggling with having multiple children and not being able to provide for another one, what does that look like?
What was your reaction when he told you that he had decided he was pro-life after this 2-week persuasion process?
I said, I'm not talking to you anymore.
Oh, that was that?
Yeah, that was it.
That was the end of the relationship then and there?
Yep. I was worried. I said, I saw a future with him. I didn't really, but I wanted to see a future with him.
Yes, aspirational.
And, I've always been a hopeless romantic, but I've also been very strict in what I believe.
Okay.
And I knew that if I had pursued that relationship even further, then I wouldn't have been sticking to what I've always wanted for myself, and that's to stick up for what I believe.
You would feel inauthentic in that relationship.
And I also feel like I would be almost doing a disservice to other women.
Let me ask you a question. I have kind of a broader species of questions about having opinions and also making sure that your opinions are shared by your friends and romantic partners or husbands, wives, etc. Let's talk about the relationship part first. Are there a group of issues that are controversial that you would feel comfortable being in a relationship with somebody, assuming you had differences on those issues? In other words, where does the threshold between things we can agree to disagree about and things
Yeah.
we can't agree to disagree about? Where is that line?
I think it's honestly very situational. I think
Okay.
it's situational in the way that I interact with that person. I think with this other boyfriend or this pro-life boyfriend, I guess you could call him. I don't know.
I guess you could.
I guess you could
It
call him
sounds
that.
like that.
I think the issue with that was that he didn't make me feel seen or understood. If he had almost accepted what I felt and accepted why I believed what I believed, then maybe we would have had a different conversation and a different type of relationship. But I think that it almost echoes the way that he was with me in other aspects. So kind of going back to your question, I think that it really just depends on the respect that you receive through what you believe.
On this issue, though, one of the things I talk to folks about a lot in this role, both on the show and then directing the organization called the Civility Initiative that I run, is about sometimes seeing people as greater than the sum of their opinions, and that all of us have a ridiculous amount of opinions, some of which we don't have much evidence for, some of which we haven't thought much about, but we're also moral people or nice to our dogs and bad drivers and half decent baseball card collectors. And we're all these groups of kind of strange things.
Sure.
But on some issues, like abortion and many other issues for many people, there must be consistency between you and I for us to have a kind of relationship. And so I'm curious about how we have collectively decided that there must be symmetry on certain issues for us to maintain closeness.
Yeah. I think it really just, I like to say that it comes down to the type of relationship that you're pursuing.
Okay.
I think when you think about a future with someone versus a friend versus someone that you're sharing your life with, I think that it's different. I think that we need to be understanding and draw that moral line of where we see morality. And I think that my personal opinion is that abortion is something that is a choice, and it should be morally accepted and morally right that we have a choice about our own bodies. And so I think when politics come into play and differences opinions in politics, then it's okay, and it's honestly great to have differences in that. But when morality comes into play and how we treat people and how we perceive people and the way that we kind of interact with the differences, I think that's where we need to draw the line.
Let's talk also about the necessity of having an opinion on questions of morality, on treating people well, on justice. You don't have to share it, but just out of curiosity, do you have a strong opinion about the war in the Ukraine?
No. And I think that it's because of my own life experience.
Okay.
I want to be more educated. I want to learn more, but I also am not in a position, I feel like, where I can have a strong opinion, but where I can voice that strong opinion because I'm not living that.
Right. It feels irrelevant to your life experience or it's something you just haven't looked into very much for whatever reason.
I think it's both. And I also think that it's like the inability for me it's just not something that resonates directly with me because I'm not living that situation. And so I want to,
right.
It's something that's been on my list in order to research and to create an opinion on. And so I see where my double standard is in terms of like how I treated that boyfriend and said like, well, you don't have an opinion, so that means that you're not like right for me. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, I was sort of getting at, you can imagine somebody saying, well, the war in Ukraine or Israel-Gaza, the civil war in the Sudan, and many other controversies that get a lot less press attention.
Sure.
These are all moral issues. These concern humanity, how we treat one another. These are massive losses of life.
Yeah.
Huge injustices happening before our very eyes, and what privilege and luxury it is of yours to say,
Totally.
Well, I just don't know.
Yeah. I think it's also different because I don't want to take a stance where I'm not supported in in what I think, like ever since I was little, and it's just the way that I've been raised as well. I've been told that I'm a strong woman, that I need to be strong, and that there's different ways to show that. And I've always been just passionate about women's rights and the way that women are perceived in this country and in all countries. And I think that like people have different paths to what lights their fire, especially in the terms of social justice. And for me, that's like racial equality and women's rights.
Yeah. And on those issues, those are kind of telltale issues for you, hallmark issues where relationships need at least to have some symmetry on the core things that guide you.
Yeah.
Your guiding lights, as you say.
And I also think that I made a mistake too in the way that I like went about that disagreement. I think that growing up and being older now, like this was a few years ago. So being older now and understanding more where people are coming from and doing more research from both sides and seeing different stories from each perspective has made me see and made me feel more like we are all just human. And we need to respect each other's humanity and also engage with it. And part of being human is disagreeing. And
so as you sort this out, because it is a little bit complicated as you talk it through, on the one hand, you feel authentic in having stood up for yourself and also engaged in a kind of persuasive effort to get him to see your point of view and the justice of your point of view. And on the other hand, you think maybe you got a few things wrong during this process. What's the lasting lesson here for you about this memory?
I think the lasting lesson for me is to go with what your head and your heart desire and what they believe in. I think that I've always led with my heart, and I'm learning now how to lead with my heart and my head. And my heart definitely took over in that situation. My emotions got the best of me in terms of how I approached it. And I wish that I had used my head a little bit more in terms of seeing his perspective, seeing where he was coming from. And so now going forward, I hope to take that experience and show me that there are different sides to every story. We're all human. We're all going to disagree. We're all going to have situations, and it's just what matters to me and everyone has those what matters to me things, Yeah. So
engage this one hypothetical as we close.
Sure.
What would have happened to the relationship if you had used your head and your heart in this controversy over abortion?
It definitely would have failed. It was doomed from the start, let's be real. But I use my knowledge in that in my current relationship, and I know that like when we disagree, it's a hard heart and a head moment, and using both of those things to guide you to a solution, guide you to a conclusion almost is what's more important.
Zara Smith, thank you so much for coming on When We Disagree.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.